Okay, it's just gone 2 o'clock here in England, so I think we'll probably get started. Um, it is absolutely wonderful to have so many of you be able to join us here today. Um, in terms of just for administrative purposes, to let you know, if you can keep your microphones muted during the presentation, that would really help. Um, and probably also what I'll do is turn off the webcams during the main part of the presentation, just so that it saves a little bit of bandwidth. I think sometimes, you know, in webinars it can struggle a little bit when so many people are involved. I'll just share my screen, and just to let you know also that I am recording this session. And we'll make it available to you, and especially to those people who have put in their apologies already, who've said that unfortunately they're not able to join us today, so that they'll be able to catch up on this session. So I'll just share my screen. Just a minute. Okay. Is that working? It's taking its time. Okay, fantastic. So we are here to talk about student engagement and digitalisation in higher education. As you're probably already gathered, my name is Mel, or Melissa, and I am the first presenter here today. I was a high school teacher in South Australia for 10 years. I taught mostly German, but I also taught a whole range of other subjects. And I did my master's in Australia before I then moved on to, I moved to Germany, and that's where I first heard about the UniLead program. And I was a research associate at the Universität Oldenburg, there in the north of Germany, where I was working on a major project with Olaf Richter, who you might have met in UniLead. And in February this year, I made the big move to come here to England, and I now work at University College London, which is in London, although at the moment, of course, we're still in lockdown. So we've been working at home for quite some time. My position at the moment is a professional one. I'm not currently an academic, but I am starting to pick up some more academic tasks as I go along. And I will be defending my PhD on the 9th of July. So actually on the 1st of July, I'm having a little trial run, a little practice run. So I'd be more than happy for any of you to come along and help me if you wanted to. And I'll hand over to my co-presenter.
Hi everybody. Yeah, good to be here with you today, and it's lovely to see everybody online. My name is Gerald Evans. I'm Head of Learning Design at the Open University in the UK. We're a distance learning organisation, and we have upwards of 100,000 students. And we produce up to about 100 new courses each year. So my team is responsible for facilitating learning design across each of those new courses. So student engagement is a big area of focus for us, and I'll be talking about the relevance of student engagement to our area when a bit later on. And I'll leave it there at the moment and hand back to Mel.
Okay, so sorry about that. I'm having to flicker between screens. I will just stop sharing my webcam there, as I said I would. Okay. Hang on a minute. Okay, here we go. Is that coming up there again? Excellent. You can hear me perfectly good. Okay, as we go through, just to let you know, Gerald is keeping track of the chat window. So if you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat. And if anything sort of springs up that you'd like to discuss as we go, then he might let me know. Otherwise, we'll definitely answer some questions at the end. So, introduction. As we know, engaging students in learning is a key goal for educators, and indeed for anyone that works in a higher education institution. Disengagement can profoundly affect students' learning outcomes as well as their cognitive development. It can also be a predictor of student dropout in both secondary schooling but also in higher education. Student engagement has been receiving increased attention, especially in the last 10 years or so. But there is ongoing criticism because it's still considered a very fuzzy notion. Some people call it a meta-construct and saying that it's like a black box. Research has found, however, that using technology can predict increased student engagement through improved self-regulation and self-efficacy, increased participation and involvement, increased involvement in the wider school or university community. However, educational technology research has lacked theoretical guidance. So, for example, in a major review that Hugh and colleagues did that was published last year, they looked at all of the EdTech research that had been published in 2017 to 2018 and found that 174 out of 503 articles were not actually guided by theory. So too, Karabulut and colleagues found only 13 out of 62 flipped learning engineering studies were actually guided by a theoretical framework. And also, the definitions and operationalisation of student engagement differ widely from study to study and from author to author. And this has been a major problem in trying to gain an overview of what student engagement is and how educational technology can therefore affect engagement positively. However, students plus technology does not necessarily equal engagement. Careful planning and sound pedagogy are absolutely crucial. So this led me to my PhD, which I did through the University of Oldenburg, which included a theoretical review and framework development on student engagement. And I did that via a PhD by publication. And so 2 of my articles out of 5 looked at how can educational technology affect and support student engagement. And I did this via a major systematic review that we did of higher education studies, as well as then developing a conceptual framework based on a further student engagement literature review, as well as a systematic review looking at flipped learning, so in blended learning situations. This led me to the following definition of student engagement: that student engagement is the energy and effort that students employ within their learning community, observable via any number of behavioural, cognitive, or affective indicators across a continuum. It is shaped by a range of structural and internal influences, including the complex interplay of relationships, learning activities, and the learning environment. The more students are engaged and empowered within their learning community, the more likely they are to channel that energy back into their learning, leading to a range of short and long-term outcomes that can likewise further fuel engagement. And to display that in a graphical format, can you see my cursor there? Just a quick question. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so as we can see here we have the learning microsystem. So we've got the student in the centre with the teacher, technology, activities, the learning environment and their peers within the microsystem. So the way that they engage within this technology-enhanced learning environment can be affected by as well as affect student engagement in this continuous flow. So the more that students are engaged, the more likely they are to feed back into their learning environment and feed back into the activities that they're doing. And then therefore the more likely they are to be engaged and lead to, in this continuous loop, and lead to those short and long-term outcomes, both academic and social. However, student engagement does not occur within a vacuum, and it is shaped by such a range of contextual factors, and it is encompassed within a wider socio-political context. So here we have a bioecological student engagement framework that I developed. So you can see here the student located at the centre and nested within a system of intertwined milieus. So we start off with the microsystem. So this is their immediate setting, whether that be within the learning institution or whether that be at home. And then you have the mesosystem, which is about the interactions between the various levels between the micro and the exo, but also between the factors within the microsystem. And it's also reflecting on the student's socio-economic background as well. And then around that is the exosystem. And so these are the wider social structures that have an influence on student engagement. And then the macro system is, again, the wider economic, social, legal, political systems that these level here are located within. So, for example, at the macro level here, we see digitalisation. And we know that digitalisation is having such a huge impact on learning and on engagement that, for example, sorry, I just got distracted by that message. I'll just get rid of that. For example, broadband, access to internet, access to devices, but you also have issues of device compatibility as well. In terms of the exosystem, we see here institutional professional development policy, institutional governance. We know that institutions that develop a culture of success, not only for students, but also for staff, as well as having higher expectations, and that it invest in that support and infrastructure, are able to have a better influence on student engagement. Okay, so what kinds of indicators are there of engagement? So in terms of engagement theory, there are three main domains of engagement. You have behavioural engagement, affective engagement, and cognitive engagement. And within this, there are a range of indicators or facets as to how you might tell that a student is engaged. So for example, under behavioural, things like the interaction with peers and the teacher, the content and the technology, time on task, you know, the time that students are spending on the different tasks that they're given and the persistence that they show towards completing those. Whereas in terms of effective engagement, we're talking about things like the sense of belonging that a student feels in a course or the enthusiasm that they feel for the tasks that they're doing. And in terms of cognitive engagement, things like learning from peers or critical thinking and deep learning that they're showing in their learning. So to disengagement, there are a range of indicators or facets of disengagement. So for example, when students are absent or they're unfocused or that they give up, that is an indicator of behavioural disengagement. So in order to gain a bit of an understanding of how educational technology might affect engagement, we conducted a systematic review. And as some of you may know, systematic reviews are a great way of being able to identify not only research gaps, but also to gain a bit of a meta overview of a particular topic. And so we undertook this review within higher education of studies that were published between 2007 and 2016. And altogether, we ended up synthesising 243 various studies. Of these, we found that within our sample that we had quite a number of studies from the arts and humanities and education fields, as well as natural sciences, mathematics and statistics. Interestingly enough, social sciences and information and communication technologies were quite a lot lower, as was engineering, which we found really interesting. The most researched educational technology within our sample were LMS, so learning management systems, discussion forums, videos, e-assessment and chat. And we found that within these studies, behavioural engagement was the most prevalent. So we looked at how often examples of behavioural engagement were found within these studies. And so we found 86% of the studies within our sample showed some form of behavioural engagement as a result of using educational technology. And this was followed by affective and cognitive engagement. And I don't think there's a real surprise in a way in that high number of behavioural engagement, partially because it is much easier to be able to perhaps track or identify, physical or obvious examples of behavioural engagement than it is to identify processes that happen within, within the students themselves, as it is perhaps with affective and cognitive engagement. So within our review, we found that of the studies that showed affective engagement, cognitive engagement and behavioural engagement, that text-based tools, for example, discussion forums and wikis, showed by far the most evidence of engagement that occurred. We also found that knowledge organisation and sharing tools, such as using LMS and cloud storage, was the next most prevalent, followed by multimodal production tools, such as videos and recorded lectures. In terms of discussion forums themselves, as one of the, I suppose, most researched technologies within this particular study, the top 5 student engagement indicators were participation, interaction and involvement, positive interactions with peers and teachers, learning from peers, achievement and deep learning. Whereas wikis, again, very similar. The top 2 are exactly the same. Top 3, in fact, are exactly the same. But in the 4th spot, we had enjoyment that was as high as achievement, and interest also came in at 5th. And there was some evidence within those studies that the enjoyment was coming from the opportunity to collaborate and create with their peers by using wikis, rather than just merely responding to student discussions, and that was the real strength of wikis. So in terms of what this means for learning environment and technology and what influences that has on student engagement, these were the things that the research evidence as well as the literature reviews all pointed to. So for example, it's really important to ensure that students have the technical and emotional support so that they are able to alleviate, for example, anxiety at receiving lower grades due to issues that they might have with technology. It's also important to describe how technology should be used within a course, and to ensure that there is some kind of agency in terms of what technology students are able to use, if that's possible. In terms of curriculum, we found that it's important to ensure that the activities are aligned with learning outcomes, and to provide plenty of opportunities for students to collaborate on activities with each other, and to keep those activities relevant and authentic, as well as a level of challenge, so that they're able to then engage fully. We also found that it was really important that instructors didn't double up on the types of activities within a particular course. For example, having students complete an online journal, as well as having students be involved in online discussion forums. We found that there was quite a bit of disengagement involved in that. We also found there was disengagement involved with some users of social media and social networking tools, which is interesting given our focus on Twitter for this particular course. And we found that where there were some cases where students weren't supported in terms of how they were to go about communicating using these platforms, and that led to a disengagement. So that's something also to think of. And of course, as we know, teacher plays an incredibly, or educator plays an incredibly important role in influences on student engagement, such as, for example, their own prior ICT experience and content expertise, but also how they use technology and how prepared they are to be able to use that technology within their courses. And so it's really crucial that institutions are able to support the ongoing development of the educators and professionals that are located within the institution, to be able to facilitate engagement with students and by students. And I think at this point, I'm going to be stopping to share my screen, and I'm going to be passing it over to Gerald, who will take us further. So just one moment. Just a minute. Okay. Okay, so we're just switching screens now, so just bear with us a minute. As we do that, I might ask if anyone has any quick questions while we're sharing screens with Gerald. If you perhaps if you wanted to quickly type it into the chat box. Oh, okay, just a minute. There we go. I'll just make Gerald the presenter. That would help. And then we can continue. That was the problem, apparently.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. Yes, that was very helpful. Okay. Okay, so I'm hoping you can see that on your screen now. Yeah, great, fantastic. So thank you, Melissa, for that. That was a great research overview. And I wanted to build on that by talking about the link between what Melissa's been describing in student engagement to our roles as managers in higher education. And I wanted to do that by discussing the link between our individual goals, the targets of our institutions, and those of the regulators in our respective countries. So, you know, each of our institutions has requirements that they need to meet for a regulator. As an individual institution, they have institutional measures and key performance indicators to meet. And when that comes down to an individual level, both in terms of an individual course and individuals as managers, well, we've already looked at and we know the link between engagement and successful outcomes for students. But we all want our students to do well. And what came across from what you were all posting in the discussion forum was that passion and that enthusiasm and recognition of the importance of student engagement and student success. And what I'm going to try to make the point about is that there's a link between all of these different areas. So in the UK, we have a regulator called the Office for Students. And the Office for Students measures and rates providers based on three key areas: so student participation, student experience, and student outcomes. And as you can see from the graphic there, what they're aiming to ensure is that every student, whatever their background, has a fulfilling experience of higher education that enriches their lives and careers. So there's a number of the indicators there that Melissa's been talking about that are captured related to student engagement in this area, in particular around student experience, but also in terms of participation and outcomes. Moving on from that focus at a national level and from the regulator leads to individual institutions needing to measure their own indicators of student engagement. In the UK, a big focus of that is on student satisfaction. So Melissa's described that as an effective engagement indicator, but it's also an outcome for students. And you can see in that graphic on the right, and this number here. So this is showing the number of students that are responding positively to a national student survey in the UK about overall student satisfaction. So 83.5% of UK students are saying that they're satisfied with their study experience. Now that's across the board, across every institution. But how that filters down is that each individual institution then has that number or that metric to be able to refer to for themselves. So it could be above or below that for an individual institution. And it also comes down to individual courses. So at the Open University and all other providers across the UK, we know how many students are satisfied with study at a course level as well. So that becomes very much relevant at different levels then to providers and to higher education managers. So in your study next week, one of the things we'll be asking you to look at is what are the focus areas in your country and your institution, and how do they relate to student engagement as well. So coming into kind of a micro level, And I wanted to look at a couple of things that I've worked on in a recent study and talk a little bit about the implications of disengagement at quite a micro level, but then also how we might be able to impact things positively at a micro level. So a recent study that I've undertaken with a colleague, one of the examples we pulled out of disengagement was an example where we had just 1% of students engaging with a particular resource. So you can see from this bottom graph here what percentage of registered students have visited a specific VLE tool or resource by week, and you can see it never gets higher than 1%. So that is a real example there of the disengagement with the resource. So a lot of time and effort's gone into producing that resource, but students aren't engaging with that for whatever reason. That could be because of the quality of the resource itself, but it could also be around findability of it. It could be that they're overloaded with other activities. There could be a whole host of reasons there which would need unpacking, but it's a very vivid example that if we don't have engagement, then you can see that there's a problem. Oh, sorry. Okay, apologies for that. Yes. So, yeah, at most 1% of students have engaged with that resource. So that's a very clear example of what happens if you don't have, if you haven't got engagement with a particular part of a course. So that's one of the real examples of disengagement. But we can also have an impact. So adjustments that we make to the learning design, and obviously as head of learning design is of particular interest to me. We can see that when we make changes, we can see what impact that has, and we can measure that, and we can see whether or not it's a positive impact on student engagement and student success. So another example from that same study is one where we made a change to an assessment strategy. And a change to how we wanted students to engage with a particular type of activity. So the yellow line on here is the percentage of students visiting a given activity after that change has been made. So you can see we've got a stronger peak early on in the course after 7 weeks, but then also students coming back to it in week 14 of the course. And the bars going up, the green bar is the assessment from the older course, and then the blue bars coming up here are the assessment in the updated course. So you can see that there's been a change in where those assessment points fall in, and you can see that there's a very deliberate increase in student engagement with a particular resource ahead of the assessment. So we've made changes to the design, we've made changes to the assessment strategy, and that's led to a very visible difference in the way that students have been engaging with that activity. So we can see them, we can make deliberate changes and have a result afterwards that hopefully is going to be positive, as in this case, but if it's not positive, we can then look at it and adjust it from then on, with the idea that we're constantly learning as we go forward. So when I reflect then in terms of what the relevance of student engagement to my role is, well, we work to design principles that are based on research. So there's a research paper that I've shared a link to there, which describes design for retention principles. Now that's designed for retention, but they're very much also around student engagement as well. So it's a set of principles we call iceberg, and that covers areas such as collaborative learning, balanced learning, making sure that students haven't got too much to do in a given week, making sure that they can reflect, and so on. So all indicators and pointing to indicators that Melissa has been describing. We see, as in the examples we just looked at, patterns of engagement, and we see those based on and impacted by student workload, the balance of activities and the types of activities that students are doing, and also the cognitive load on students. So we see where students have got too much to do in a given week. We see that it impacts on what they're able to engage with. We see where we've got an activity balance that isn't quite right. Perhaps there's too much reading versus other types of activities. Again, that engagement isn't quite there. So we can make changes, and we can create designs for study, and we can then see what happens with students when they go live. But it also means that we can make deliberate decisions up front, which will hopefully have positive impacts for the students. And as I said, we've got tools to be able to monitor that once the designs go live as well. So it's very important for us as learning designers to not just be designing in a vacuum, but be able to put, when things go live, to be able to look at what's happening for the students, how it's working for them, and then to make adjustments following that subsequent design. And we produce good practice guides. So one of the things that Melissa talked about was about collaborative learning. We've produced a good practice guide on collaborative learning, for instance, and we certainly, I can only echo the point about technology choice. We've also found that where we provide technology choice, that has a really positive effect on students, because they're getting that choice of where they can engage and what kind of tool they want to use to do that. So that's a little bit about the relevance of it to my own role. And as I say, what you'll be looking at over the next week or so is the relevance to your roles as well. And I just wanted to finish by talking back to that initial slide that I had. So starting at that individual level, we know that link between engagement and successful outcomes, as we described. We want students to do well, and we've got, hopefully we've got agency and opportunities to support that through engaging with the research such as that Melissa's been sharing. We can then impact on what's happening at institutional level, because if we've got that good practice happening at that individual level across the board, then that starts to drive up student satisfaction and performance at a higher level, and that again then has a positive impact at the regulator level as well. So my argument there is that actually by starting to have that impact at a local level, at a small level, we can drive positive change up through the system. So that's everything I was going to cover in terms of thinking about what student engagement means to me in my role, and thinking about what it means for others in management roles in higher education. And to finish off today from my perspective, I just wanted to share some notes in terms of what you've been saying in response to the introductory questions on student engagement. So we'll post something shortly into there in terms of our thoughts in response to those questions, but it was really interesting to read some of your responses there, and we've put those into a word cloud, and what's pleasing for me here is some of the phrases and some of the words coming up strongly here. So learning's coming up particularly frequently, facilitation, activities. So certainly as a learning designer, we talk very much about designing for the students and designing student activities rather than content. Environment, context has come up quite a bit in here as well, so there's different words relating to the context in which learning is happening. Different words around commitments and motivation for students, but also a number of areas where people have been talking about the group or the social side of learning, and so on. So I just wanted to leave you with that at that point in time, and as I say, we'll talk a bit further about that in the forum later on.
Okay, so we wanted to be able to give you some time to ask questions or to have a little bit of a discussion. If you could keep sharing those slides, that'd be great. Yeah, perfect. So if you had any questions, or if you wanted to discuss anything that we've talked about today, you could either write it in the chat, or you could. That would probably be the best thing to do, because here for some reason they don't have a hands up tool, which some do have. So if you have any questions, please type it in the chat now. Otherwise, you could always pop your microphone on and butt in if no one else is talking. What I've got on the screen there is some of those short and long-term outcomes arising out of engagement. So things like, for example, the knowledge, attitude and skills, increased technology confidence and improved study habits, but also leading to some of those, lifelong learning skills, leading to retention in terms of continuing the learning, but also to, longer term social outcomes as well. not only greater involvement within the institution, but within other communities, and personal growth as well, which is really important. And while people are typing in the chat, if we skip forward to what you'll be doing after this, while we wait for any questions that come forward. There we go. What we'd really like you to do is we've created a space in the discussion forum, another thread that you can see there on the screen called Webinar Reflection. It would be really wonderful if following this webinar, it doesn't have to be today, it could be tomorrow or the next day, if you write a brief, 2 to 3 paragraph reflection on this webinar in the forum, including, what you've taken away from today, and if you had any burning questions. Okay, so I'm just having a look at Arash's question, asking to explain more about the bioecological platform and its differences to the socio-cultural platform. So the bioecological model was based on one by Bronfenbrenner and colleagues, and that was actually originally developed with a child development in mind. So this is actually from sort of a younger learner that they initially developed it about, but it's different in the sense that, so say for example, Kahu's model of student engagement, if you're familiar with that, is based on a socio-cultural model, but this bioecological one is more about that nesting within the various layers. I don't know if you're able to skip back. No, that's too hard. Okay. And that's its, I guess that's its key difference between the two, is that, I mean, its name is, bioecological, but the difference is realizing that each layer within the bioecological model, each level, interacts and affects each of the other levels as well, and that it has such wide-ranging connections to various features of a student's life. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but hopefully I have. By all means, the article Bond and Modenlier 2019 goes into that in more detail. Okay, the next question's for Gerald, which is that Gerald told us about tools to monitor learning design impact. Can you please explain us more about these tools?
Hi there. Yep, thank you for that question, Monica. Yes, so I can certainly talk about what we use at the Open University for that. So we have learning analytics that we use that come out from our virtual learning environment. So we use Moodle, and Moodle has a number of different reports that we can get out of that. But we've also then got that quite a sophisticated setup in sorry, Melissa's busy playing with my settings. Yes, okay, sorry. Showing the webcam. Okay. Yeah, so we use Moodle, and we can get reports out of Moodle for that. We've also then got a SAS VA setup where we're able to then drill down into more detail. So those screenshots that I shared were SAS VA screenshots from our system. So we use learning analytics for that. We've then got surveys that we use. So we've got an end of module survey which gives us information around the student satisfaction, which I referenced, but we also have open comments in there so we can dig into a bit more detail about what students are finding. We also try to draw on evidence that's coming through either from the tutors or from the students during their study as well. So we've got specific questionnaire tools we use for that, but also the information coming back from students to their tutors we find is really valuable as well. So it's a combination of qualitative and quantitative information that we can use. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Gerard.
Do you want to mute? And I think that sort of answered Catherine's question as well.
Okay, great.
We also had a question from Mercy about whether or not there are any views on student engagement in extracurricular activities. That's a really, really good question. The research that we did was focused mostly on, we only included studies actually that were located within courses, but there's definitely, certainly I've seen from Kahu, Ella Kahu is her name. She's a brilliant researcher from New Zealand, and she actually particularly focuses on the first year student perspective. And that, I'm sure, would include students' engagement in terms of extracurricular activities. So what I'll do is I'll grab some resources for you and upload them to Cello so that you're able to access that, and I'll reflect a little bit more there on that for you.
Thank you so much. That's well answered.
Yeah, I can see a couple of other people typing. We initially made this, wanted to make sure that we weren't taking too much of your time with this webinar, because we know time is precious, especially at the moment, given these conditions that we're living in. So we have sort of reached the time that we said we would take, but I'll just wait until this potential last question comes through. Otherwise, please, use that space. I think Gerald wanted to say something.
I was probably going to say the same thing that you were going to say. But I was just going to make the point that by all means, use that space in the discussion forum to flag any further questions you've got, and we'll be in there and we'll have a look. And if there's any additional questions or thoughts that you've got, then we'll definitely be able to respond to questions in there as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, you took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say. So yeah, if there aren't any other questions, then thank you so very much for your attendance today. Hopefully the recordings worked perfectly, and I'll be able to give you access to that later this afternoon if you needed it for any reason, but also more importantly for those people who weren't able to join us. We really are enjoying seeing those comments come through on the discussion forum, and are trying to engage as much as possible with them. But also it's been lovely to see you answering the posts of others. And that is all about facilitating that collaboration and that agency, and trying to, I guess, develop a community between all of you, rather than just between us as the facilitators. So, yeah, with that, I'll say thank you very much. If any more, I'll hang around for a little bit longer. So if you've got any other questions, don't hesitate to type them in, or otherwise save them for your post on the discussion forum, and we can answer you there. And I'll say thank you very much and goodbye. Hopefully we get to talk again soon.
Thanks everybody. Thanks everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gerard and
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Gracias. Bye. Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.